little kids, 6 through 12-year-olds, are you guys out there? You still with us? All right, let me hear you. Where are you? Come on. How many of you guys like to get good gifts from your parents? Yes? Well, I remember my dad one time, this was a weekend, and I was going into college, or I was during the summer between college and high school, and I went to him and said, I really need to borrow your car. He had a Chevy Tahoe at the time. And I said, can I please borrow it? We're all going to the lake and I need this car. And, for all of us to fit in a big car to drive the lake. And we hadn't really ever taken his car out to drive on our own or anything like that. So it's kind of a big deal that I would ask to take his Tahoe. And he said, I don't know. Let me think about it. So a little while later, usually we took the van. And so a little while later, he comes in and he says, hey, I'm preaching this weekend on Matthew 7. And he begins to read the verses to me. He says, for everyone who asks receives, everyone who seeks finds, and the door is open to him who knocks. You parents, if your children ask for a loaf of bread, do you give them a stone instead? Or if they ask for a fish, do you give them a snake? Of course not. If you sinful people know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask him? He said, and then he turns to me and said, do you have an example? I said, well, are you going to let me borrow your Tahoe? And he just looks at me, he goes, Ruthie. And he just kind of smiled. I said, well, that would be a great example for you, because then you would allow me to borrow this, good gift to your children. And he just shook his head and he just couldn't believe what I said. And I said, well, I can borrow it, right? And he said, okay, you can borrow it. And, I thought about that and how that's how my dad was. He was someone who was selfless with everything he owned. And he made the statement many times, whatever's mine is yours. He said, you can borrow my socks or a t-shirt. What do you need? He'd pull out these crazy hats. He said, who needs a hat for the day? And he'd pull out all these crazy hats and, whatever it was, but he was willing to give. And that's the heart of a father, is willing to give and to share generously. And to be willing to say, you know what, whatever's mine is yours. He had a mindset that, everything's temporary. It's not eternal. We're not going to take this stuff into eternity. So let's share it. Let's let people use it. That's what it's for. And he wasn't trying to hoard all of his little own things that he had as a dad. He said, no, I want to share everything I have. And that was something that I learned from my dad, as well as 2 Timothy 4:2 says, preach the word and be ready in season and out of season. My dad was someone who was ready in season and out of season for anything. And I think about every spring, in the back of my dad's car, you would find a fishing pole and a tackle box and golf clubs. And usually there was, a flashlight in there and some sort of a rain jacket. That was what he always had. He was ready for anything. Now, the golf clubs didn't get used very much, but he did every now and then stop on the side of the road and pull out his fishing pole and tackle box if he saw a creek nearby. But he was ready at any moment. And I think about that for all of us, that not only he taught us that in a practical way to be ready for anything wherever we are, but be ready spiritually. And he practiced that, whether we were out to dinner and someone at the restaurant approached him, or the hostess, and he would speak the word into them. And he practiced what he preached. Whatever he was preaching from the pulpit, he practiced it at home. And we saw that. And that was a huge part of his life. And I'm grateful, because that's what legacy is. A legacy that a father leaves is not just in word, but it's in deed. It's what you do, that's what you leave behind. So, Paul, why don't you come on up and share, because I believe he's got some good words as well.
Leftovers, hand-me-downs. I'm the youngest, I get them. So I'm happy to get the last second here. But you know what? Everything they said is so true. And just, I look back, and I remember the week after Dad passed away, just looking at what did Dad leave behind? What was the legacy he left? And it was more than buildings. It was more than money. It was more than, a house or anything that was material. We look at some of these wealthy people who leave this inheritance, and we talk about an inheritance. But I believe one of the greatest things he left behind was his lifestyle to serve. At the end of your life, when you get to heaven, there's words that Jesus will say to you. Whether you like this or not, Jesus will say, well done, thou good and faithful. He doesn't say, well done, thou good and faithful person who used grace in vain and did whatever you wanted and pleased yourself. Well done, thou good and faithful. How did you serve? How did you live? Did you live to serve or did you live to please yourself? Did you live to serve yourself or serve your family? And I remember watching my dad walk through the parking lot picking up trash. And here's this man who's the pastor and the overseer of all these other, people and ministries. And he said, Paul, I don't see myself as an overseer. I see myself down here. I serve people. That's what I live to do. And I remember him taking John and I to the Dream Center field, picking up trash, taking our family to different places that weren't even part of Victory. We would clean up. He was a janitor at home. He would come home, make sure there was no trash in the movies that we were watching or the TV shows that were on when he walked home. He was constantly taking care of the house and this house. And like Ruthie said, he lived what he preached, and he preached what he lived. He didn't, preach about not exasperating your children on Sunday and then come home and yell at us and tell us, what to do and go out and make his main priority that week, hanging out with friends and golfing in the ministry. No, his main priority was taking care of the family, taking care of his children and his wife, and then making sure that the ministry was taken care of. And when he did go golfing, he took us with him. So, I think it's interesting sometimes how we can become so focused on what we want and forget that in eternity, the only thing that matters is, did we live to serve or did we live to please ourselves? Was our life about me, pleasing what I, wanted, or was it about pleasing others and serving others? I just want to say this to everyone who's here who doesn't have a father here today. And maybe your dad's gone on to be with the Lord. In Psalm 68, verse 5, God says that he's a father to the fatherless. And I know that today I can celebrate that God is the best dad in the world that we could ever have. No matter how good your dad was here on earth or how bad your dad was, if you don't have your dad, you can celebrate that we have the best dad in the world. Come on, can we give our dad up in heaven a big hand clap? And here's the awesome thing about our dad. You and I's dad, we share him, we're brothers and sisters. He is a dad who's there for us. He doesn't leave on a business trip for 3 months and then come back and say he wants to spend time with us and then leave again. He's a dad who's constantly there for us. He's a dad who believes in us. He's a dad who gives us second chances, third chances, chances into the thousands. Why? Because he loves us. And that's the kind of father that he wants us to be to our kids, to the kids that I'll have one day, the legacy that my dad left behind. I remember one day I was playing football and I was the quarterback because my dad was the quarterback and I wanted to be the quarterback since he was the quarterback. So I was playing JV, second string quarterback. We were playing Jinx and we were down 42-0 in the third quarter. And, I was getting sacked every play. And I just kept looking to the stands and my dad was just giving me 2 thumbs up. And I was just like, leave. I don't want you here. I'm just failing miserably, and I don't want you to see me fail. But I remember after the game, he just came in there and was like, Paul, great game. And I was like, whatever. Shut, whatever. But I wasn't going to tell my dad to shut up. But basically, I was just like, what? That was a terrible game. And he's like, no, Paul, you did so good. When you fell, it was just awesome, and you handed that ball off to the other team so well, And I was like, Dad. But basically, he was constantly cheerleading us. So he was a janitor and he was a cheerleader. And those are the 2 things that I think is so great that he left behind and many other things. But, I think that one day your kids are going to have a choice to either follow the legacy you left behind or they're going to deny to follow the legacy you left behind. And, I look at my dad, and I remember just 2 weeks ago we were in Brazil, and I was asked to preach to this pastor's leadership conference. And I was thinking, what did I learn from my dad? And so the whole message was lessons from Pastor Dad. And so I told them the things that he taught me. But I said, in the end, he left a legacy that I would dare to follow, that I would dare to follow his legacy. And some kids are scared to follow your legacy. But what if we left a legacy behind that someone would say, man, I would dare to follow that legacy. You know what I'm saying? Like the kind of legacy that someone says, if I could just do half the things he did, that would be awesome. And I think he lived a life that said, follow me as I follow Christ. Why don't we bow our heads and close our eyes across this room? And just think about, maybe you're here today and you hear these stories that are funny, but also encouraging, knowing that we have a dad who forgives us, who loves us, who's there for us, who wants the best for us.